Good morning, everyone. Everyone can hear me? Thank you very much to be here on our first webinar organized by the Belgian Vietnamese Alliance together with Belgian. We are two Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but one is hosted in Belgium and the other one is hosted in Ho Chi Minh. Before we can start, I have just one small rule that I like to deal with the attendees. Your micro and your video is switched off, so you can listen to us. And if you have a question, in the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A, and there you can write down your question. If you have a specific question for one of our member of the panel, you can add it to your question. And if you like really, because your question is important, that your question has to be answered live, you can also mention in your question so that we can, at the end, wrap up all the questions here in our Q&A. And in the last 20 minutes, then we have our Q&A. So I think this is clear. If you have some technical issues, then it's better to use the chat box. If you want to say hello to someone, you can also use this chat box. Because I have to say good morning for everyone, but that's for the people who are staying now in Belgium. But I have to say good evening to everyone for all the people staying in Vietnam, or almost evening. Let me start with just a small introduction. The European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement that will enter into force on the 1st August will certainly have positive consequences for Belgian exporters as the growth prospects for the Vietnamese economy remains promising despite the current COVID-19. Nevertheless, many among us still have relevant questions. And thus, together with our trade agencies, embassies, and experts, we're willing to help you further and provide you during this webinar the right answers. Because in general, the benefit of the European Vietnamese Free Trade Agreement is beyond tariff removal. Further, it also enhances the transparency and the predictability of Vietnam's legal framework and business environment. The Trade Pact will promote regional production restructuring and turn Vietnam into a manufacturing hub by attracting larger foreign direct investment flows associated with technology transfer. In that context, both EU and Vietnamese enterprises must be aware of the market opportunities and fully prepared to embrace the upcoming challenges. I'd like to give now the floor to the first speaker of our webinar. And the first speaker of our webinar is Mr. Luong Thai, who is Director General of the Multilateral Trade Policy Department, MoIT. And he will talk about what impact will have the EU VN Free Trade Agreement and why was it so important for the Vietnam to conclude this agreement. I give Mr. Luong Thai the floor now. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Good afternoon from Hanoi and good morning over there. So I'm very glad to be present in your webinar today, and thank you to the Belgian Vietnamese Alliance for organizing this very interesting seminar that we have. So first, I think you all know that we have the agreement signed back in June last year, and then subsequently ratified by both the European Parliament and our National Assembly. And we expect the agreement coming into force on the 1st of August, which is very soon. And already we have seen the considerable interest from both sides, the Vietnamese side, but also from the European side. So first, let me brief you how, from the Vietnamese government point of view, the importance of this agreement. I think for a while, you may have all know that Vietnam is very committed to international economic integration. So even in the time of the difficult international environment like today, we are one of the very few who continue to push forward with some of the major important international integration efforts. Earlier, we were very few countries in ASEAN who have ratified the agreement, and now with the European agreement, we very much hope that we can bring the relationship to a much higher level than we used to have. We already have a strong bilateral relationship with the EU, and you may know that trade between the two sides increased more than 13 times from 2000 to 2000 and to last year. We have increased the trade a lot, and Vietnam is now one of the most important trading partner of the EU in the ASEAN region, and we do hope that we can further strengthen that relationship. How? Because now we have the strong agreement in the name of the FTA with the EU, EVFTA. I think this is in particular important in the time when many people have doubt about free trade. And you know that even the WTO has some difficulties in functioning its role in international trade. So with the EU leading on the rules-based trading system, we hope that some like-minded countries we can together work on ways to at least provide a stable environment for the businesses to operate in. So that's a backdrop. Now, I think with the agreement coming into force on the 1st of July, you may have heard that we have a number of important features in the agreement that may be of interest to the business community. So as a part of the government reaching out efforts, we had a lot of seminars actually back here in Hanoi. We are not closed because of the COVID-19. Things are still in operation with many people, European businesses in Hanoi, and I think from both sides, the Vietnamese side and the European side, there's some considerable excitement about the agreement. For example, in one of the seminar, we had the one investor coming from Belgium, invested in an industrial zone in the north of Vietnam, a big area, and there were a lot of queries, not only from the European businesses, but from other investors interested in Vietnam, partly thanks to the FTA that we had, in particular the FTA with the EU, EVFTA. So they care about many important things, but of course, the number one thing is the high quality in the market opening commitments, in particular in trade in goods and services, but also in terms of investment and government procurement. So you may find that in services, for example, there are many new commitments in the agreement, from the professional services to environmental services to things like dredging services also. And investment, we also have a commitment there to liberalize things, including, for example, some sectors that used to be closed in Vietnam, like beer and beverages. So, and the government procurement is one of the first time ever commitments we have in the FTA that we opened for both central government and some of the provinces, most importantly Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. And in addition to that, we also opened the market in terms of procurement to some of the utilities in Vietnam. So that's something important because in one of the key sectors, for example, in pharmaceutical products, the public hospitals and some government institutions in Vietnam continue to play an important role. And if we create a better environment in this, of course, it will bring kind of win-win situation for both. As I mentioned, the pharma sector is one important one. We were there. We had the Eurochan, which has a sub-group called Pharma Group, and they just presented to the government of Vietnam an interesting study on how the businesses on both sides can work together in many areas to bring out a good outcome for both sides we can develop together. And of course, one important part of the agreement are the rules, which are going to be more transparent thanks to the agreement. Rules including in areas related to market access like government procurement, but also in other areas, but they're very important, for example, in the protection of intellectual property rights, also improved a lot. And we also have strong commitments in terms of sustainable development, for example. So together with that, we hope that once the agreement will be coming into force on the first day of August, we can work together. Of course, it's only the beginning. We hope that there will be more interactions so that we can adjust things along the way, because I can tell you that the legal system in Vietnam, for example, is not the best. We hope that with the agreement it will be improved, but we need to work together. And in terms of that, the government is now developing a kind of action plan, and we hope to work together with the European businesses together with the Vietnamese businesses so that we can adjust as we develop together. So thank you, and we look forward to the outcome of our webinar so that we can have more inputs so that we can implement the agreement in a way that is beneficial to both of us. So thank you once again for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoang Tai. Thank you for your keynote. I'd like to announce now the next speaker for today in our webinar. And the next speaker is Mrs. Axelle Nicaise, who is also Deputy Head of the European delegation based in Vietnam. And she will tell us more about what is the impact of the European Union VN Free Trade Agreement on European level, expected evolution of certain taxes according to the sector, and or transitional measures. Mrs. Nicaise, thank you to be there in our panel, and I give you the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. So regarding the evolution of taxes, where is actually I was asked to focus my intervention. Basically, I want to remind that there is the issue of tariff but there are also tangible and non-tangible benefits on this relatively broad and very ambitious agreement. So to speak concretely, to remind that the EVFTA will eliminate nearly all tariff, over 99%. On a certain period of time, as you know, 10-year period for Vietnam and 7-year period for the EU. Now with the liberalization of the tariff, a high coverage is achieved already at the entry into force, which will take place on the 1st of August this year. So, which is basically in 2 weeks' time. And then 71% of the Vietnamese export will enter the EU duty-free from day one. Compare, on the other hand, with 65% for the EU export. Many of Vietnamese and European key export products will enjoy tangible benefit from this FTA. To give you a few examples, the tariff for Vietnamese textile and garment, footwear, fishery products will have a 0% duty within 7 years, with very few exceptions. Import duties on wine and spirit from the EU will be eliminated to the full within 7 years. Cars from Europe will enter Vietnam market at 0% duty after 10 years. Car parts will be tariff-free earlier, after 7 years. That just to give you a few figures and example. So certainly, the FTA will create wider positive impact on both economies for Vietnam and for the EU, with this increased two-way trade flow. There has been a study that was made a few years ago in 2017 by the European Commission regarding the impact on both economies. And it was indicated, for instance, that the export gained an estimated 8 billion euro by 2035, which is said in 15 years, for EU firms. While Vietnam exports to the EU will expect to grow by 15 billion of euro. Vietnam exports to the EU are estimated to grow around 18%, according to this study. So these are just figures. Of course, it doesn't give the broader picture and capture all the dynamic gains that will result both for the economies and the societies of Vietnam and the EU. First of all, it will be a unique opportunity for European business. EU exporter will be put on equal footing with those from other countries and regions with which Vietnam has already concluded FTA, like the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, China, India, Japan, and South Korea. This will offer new business opportunities for agricultural, industrial, and service exporters from the EU that so far have been curtailed by existing trade barriers. Vietnam will in turn enjoy privileged access to the EU market on a similar footing than, for instance, South Korea or Singapore. Consumers and firms in the EU and Vietnam will stand to gain from the increased availability of products and inputs. This is for the immediate, the easy part, if I may say, when we speak about data and figures. But maybe the biggest benefit, and that's what the delegation wants also to stress, is not limited to the removal of tariff. There are also wider impact that will be created by a better transparency and predictability. And having a market that is transparent and predictable is what any business is looking ahead. And so if we have a better and more predictable Vietnamese legal and business environment, that will be only positive for foreign investors, but also for the local companies, for the Vietnamese companies, many of which are very dynamic SMEs, with whom European economic actors can also engage. A second interesting impact would be the potential relocation of manufacturing base from neighboring countries to Vietnam, and then transforming Vietnam progressively in a regional production hub. Other important, the stronger FDI flow would be trigger a transfer of advanced technology, management expertise, better practice to Vietnam. And finally, more employment for the Vietnamese young labor force. That would also help the government of Vietnam to tackle the issue of creating 1.5 million of new jobs for the young people joining the labor force every year. And by the end, a better quality life for the society that promotes sustainable economic growth. If the implementation is properly managed, because now we are speaking about implementation, that will happen in 2 weeks' time, the FTA can trigger the necessary domestic reform in Vietnam and contribute to a more stable and predictable environment, which in return will boost FDI flow, technology transfer, know-how sharing. Transparency, protection of IPR, labor, working standards, environment commitment are all currently under the negotiation. And all this will positively contribute to the improvement of the performance of Vietnam administration, as well as the economy as a whole. So in our views, we want to speak about the reduction of tariffs, but also for all the intangible results that will produce. Of course, now it's not only a matter of negotiating or signing or taking the exchanging ratification instrument. Now it's a matter of implementation. And now it's a matter of sharing the information, promoting this FTA, which is giving so much opportunities, and making sure that all the economic operators, both on the EU side or the Vietnamese side, can grab these opportunities. So we still have a lot of work ahead in promoting and making this understandable and accessible. And many thanks for the Chamber of Commerce, Eurocham, the National Chamber of Commerce, in doing this effort of promotion and sharing all that the FTA has to offer from operators on both sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Axelle Nicaise, for your inspiring keynote. I'd like to go now to our next speaker of the panel. Normally it has to be Heer Bourgeois, who was also a rapporteur in the European Parliament concerning this free trade agreement, but because of an urgent meeting, it will be Hendrik Teunissen. So Hendrik Teunissen, you have the floor, and I'd like you to tell us about how was negotiations done about this free trade agreement and a short content on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for the invitation, for inviting Mr. Geert Bourgeois, standing rapporteur, who could unfortunately not join us today, but you have his warm hello. We believe these agreements are a clear win-win to both the EU and Vietnam. There are just 4 points Mr. Bourgeois would like to convey. His first point is that this EU Vietnam FTA and IPA were the first trade and investment agreements to be approved by this new elected European Parliament. This is a unique opportunity for the EU and Vietnam to set the tone in a more unstable world with trade tensions. It constituted thus a unique opportunity to fully support the ambition of the Commission von der Leyen to go for a geopolitical union that embraces rule-based trade and that is willing to joint raise standards. With these agreements, we reaffirmed our commitments towards free and fair trade based on modern rules. That commitment to free and fair trade is now more than important than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic has halted global trade flows. A fall in the European economy of 8.7% is expected in 2020. Global trade is expected to decrease between 10 and 16%. It has inspired many to call into question the system of open and free trade, and it has made them resort to protectionist rhetoric. So for us, it is the most important that we as Europeans, and coming from Flanders and exporting nations, continue to stress and underline the enormous benefits free trade in terms of wealth, prosperity, and upwards economic mobility can bring. The second point, the parliamentary approval of these agreements was a question of credibility. It is important that the EU maintains its status as a credible partner, capable of negotiating, signing, and concluding trade agreements in good faith. The negotiations with Vietnam started in 2012 and were concluded 5 years ago, resulting in the most comprehensive trade deal between the EU and an Asian country. As such, this deal with Vietnam sets a new benchmark for Europe's engagement with emerging economies. Furthermore, by ratifying these agreements, the EU did not only give a strong signal to Vietnam, but to the entire Asian region. Vietnam currently holds the Asian presidency. So Vietnam, we believe, is the gateway to the entire Asian region. This agreement brings the long-term goal of an EU-Asian trade in respect. This should be our objective. The third point, Vietnam agreements serve as an effective instrument to promote fundamental values and a greater level playing field. Under the agreement, Vietnam has trustworthy committed to a series of important measures and legislative processes, such as the ratification of ILO fundamental conventions, the revision of its labor codes, a clear commitment to implement the Paris Climate Agreement, greater respect of environmental and sustainable standards, and the human rights situation, including that of persons of concern. Vietnam is currently a country in transformation. The ratification of these agreements further contributes to the improvement of the living standards of many thousands of families. Thus, they allow the EU to fully support the Vietnamese government to bring forward its positive agenda for change in the country. Mr. Bourgeois would also like to mention the role of the European Parliament in this respect, which was indeed essential. We are committed to continue to closely follow up on the proceedings of the independent organizations taking part in the domestic advisory groups. And we are looking forward to strengthening political dialogue with the Vietnamese colleagues through the establishment of an EU VN FTA joint parliamentary monitoring group. And last but not least, Chairman, I would like to stress as a fourth point, the economic value. The delegation has already pointed out. Prior to the outbreak of the coronavirus and the subsequent economic crisis, the EU was running a very important trade deficit of more than 30 billion euro in 2018. These agreements will indeed, as the delegation pointed out, get rid of 99% of all tariffs over time on both sides. Through increased use of international standards, this deal will also do away with important non-tariff barriers, reduce costs for business. The Commission's economic impact assessments indicate that by the year 2035, Vietnamese exports to the EU will increase by 15 billion, while EU exports to Vietnam augment 8.3 billion. This is clearly a good news for many 10,000s of jobs and better paid jobs. Lastly, I'd like to point out that Vietnam accepted, and even before Canada did, the modern ICS system the EU promotes, and it is ready to open up investment in a number of key sectors, such as food and beverages. In conclusion, Chairman, some points foster the creation of prosperity by free and fair trade. These agreements will allow the EU to take responsibility to set standards worldwide, put the EU in pole position, taking the lead on rules-based trade in times of rising trade tensions and protectionism, contribute to the ambition of the EU to become a truly geopolitical player by strengthening the ties, especially through Vietnam, to the Asian region, and it will further bring our peoples together. Most important point, it will contribute to the mutual EU-Vietnam interests on a political, economic, and cultural level. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendrik Teunissen, for your keynote. Now I'd like to go to the Ambassador Hoang, the Vietnamese ambassador in Belgium, in the Kingdom of Belgium and for Europe. And with the next question, what are the expectations of Vietnam? What can Belgian entrepreneurs expect there over in Vietnam? Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Senator André Griffin. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to attend the webinar on business and investment opportunities for Belgium and Vietnam under the EVFTA and the EVIPA today. The webinar takes place in a very important context, when Vietnam and the EU have just completed the internal notification procedures for the EVFTA agreement, paving the way for the EVFTA agreement to come into force from the 1st of August 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, the EVFTA is the most modern, comprehensive, and ambitious trade agreement ever concluded between the EU and a developing country. The agreement is a strong signal in favor of free, fair, and reciprocal trade in times of growing protectionist tendencies and serious challenges to multilateral rule-based trade. The EVFTA, by gradually eliminating 99% of import tariff lines between Vietnam and the EU, will create new opportunities for Vietnam and EU business community to increase exports to very large and potential markets of both sides. EVFTA will create a strong impetus for Vietnam and EU trade relations. immediately after the EVFTA take effect, 84% of tariff lines, accounting for 71% of Vietnam's export to the EU, will be reduced to 0%. And after 7 years, 99.2% of tariff lines, accounting for 99.7% of Vietnam export to the EU, will be eliminated. With the remaining 0.3% of export, the EU will give Vietnam a tariff quota, and the import duty within the quota is 0%. Thus, nearly 100% of Vietnam export to the EU market will have no import taxes until 2027. And on the other hand, Vietnamese consumers will benefit when 65% of the value of EU export to Vietnam will be exempt of import taxes after the agreement comes into effect. The rest will be eliminated in accordance with the 10 years commitment roadmap. And as Mr. Luong of the MoIT said, the EVFTA is only the FTA that Vietnam has commitments on opening up the government procurement market for European businesses. Regarding the EVIPA, is a progressive investment agreement which replaces 21 separate investment agreements signed between the EU member states and Vietnam. EVIPA will improve the level of investment protection and legal stability and ensure fair and equitable treatment for European investors, thus helping increase EU investment in Vietnam, especially in high-tech industries, clean energy, automation, finance, banking, transportation, logistics, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, regarding the expectation of Vietnam and what can Belgian entrepreneurs expect there, I would like to say that the expectation of Vietnam and Belgian entrepreneurs with the EVFTA and IPA are very high. For Vietnam, EU is the second largest trading partner, and Belgium is the seventh largest trading partner in the EU. With its strategic position in the EU, Belgium will be an important gateway for thousands of Vietnamese products to access the EU markets. For the EU, Vietnam is the 17th trading partner in the world and the second in ASEAN. Vietnam is not only a bridge to the ASEAN community of 500 million people, but also a trade hub to the world. Until now, Vietnam has signed 13 FTAs with almost all key trading partners, accounting for 85% of total foreign trade of Vietnam. So, taking into account the great benefits of the EVFTA and EVIPA, never before Belgium and Vietnam will witness such a golden opportunity to uplift their trade connectivity. And as ambassador to Belgium, I wish to share my thoughts on the two questions by the organizers as follows. So what are the expectations of Vietnam? We have at least 5 expectations. The first expectation is that so it's great importance that the Belgian enterprises continue to echo their voices to the call for Belgian authorities' ratification of the EVIPA as the soonest possible. Second, Belgium maintains its active role in implementing EU's commitment to promoting capacity building programs to assist Vietnam's EVFTA implementation process. Third, bilateral trade and investment should be increased in such areas of mutual and complementary interests as smart agriculture, food safety, environmental technology, logistics, etc. the two sides should strive towards the common goals of sustainable development goals in the post-COVID-19 recovery period. First, Belgian authorities and enterprises place Vietnam at the heart of their future plan on restructuring and shifting of supply chain within Southeast Asia. Fifth, last but not least, Belgian enterprises should make best and effective use of the government export financing tool, the FINESPO, and supportive measures for SMEs to promote their export and foreign investment activities in Vietnam. And now, what can Belgian entrepreneurs expect there? So I think there are at least 4 expectations for Belgian business community. The first expectation is that rising as a regional FTA hub, Vietnam provides conducive environment for Belgian export and investment activities in terms of seaports, digital technology, railway, sea transportation networks, smart agriculture, etc. Second, Vietnam is gaining a strong footage and becoming an emerging international labor market with promising favorable working conditions for the EU and Belgian expats. Third, Vietnam's rapid digital transformation process with the government highly prioritized resources will open up great opportunity for Belgian tech companies to expand their investment activities and further enhance Belgium's global image as among EU top 10 digitalized members. Last but not least, in its endeavor to overcome the COVID-19 crisis, the Vietnamese government has been fostering practical solutions to attack FDI and the establishment of a high-level working group headed by the MOFA to study measures on the FDI facilitation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the prospect for Vietnam-Belgium trade and investment from the EVFTA and the EVIPA are very harsh. However, it is important that the two sides focus on effectively implementing the two agreements. First, the EVFTA, which will take effect from the 1st of August 2020. Enterprises from both Vietnam and Belgium should study carefully details of the two agreements and be well prepared for the implementation phase in order to explore the benefits of the two deals in the coming time. And the Embassy of Vietnam and its trade office in Belgium and the EU are ready to act as a bridge to support the business community of the two sides during the implementation of the trade deal and the incoming investment deal. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your very enthusiasm and for your keynote here. Thank you very much to be here also in our webinar. I'd like to go now to our next speaker and from our panel. And this is Mr. Duong Duy Hoang, who is Vice Chairman of the VCCI. VCCI is the Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And the question is, how do Vietnamese entrepreneurs estimate their business import/export, and what do they expect? Which sectors will initially make the most use of this? And how do Vietnamese entrepreneurs prepare, and how can we help them? Mr. Duong Duy Hoang, you have the floor. Mr. Duong Duy Hoang, you have to unmute yourself, your micro, which is in the... Okay, thank you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, very nice, thank you.
So good morning again, Belgium, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to speak with all of you today. Thank you, the Belgian Vietnamese Alliance, for organizing this event. Thank you, BVA Chairman, Mr. Andries Griffoy and Ms. Lou Goldbart for working very hard to make today's event happen. Within 8 minutes today, I am asked to share with you what Vietnamese businesses expect from the EVFTA, which sectors will make the most use of this, and how Vietnamese businesses prepare for this, and how we can help them to overcome the challenges and capitalize on the opportunities coming from the FTA. So first question, what Vietnamese businesses expect from the EVFTA? As you may know that last year, according to our statistic, EU is Vietnam's second largest export market after US. And the import-export value between Vietnam and EU, including 28 countries, UK also included, reached about 56.4 billion US dollars in 2019, accounting for nearly 11% of the Vietnamese total import-exports value. In particular, the total value of Vietnam's export to EU in last year reached 41.5 billion US dollars, accounting for 15.7% of the Vietnamese total merchandise export value. And the total value of imported goods from EU reached 14.9 billion US dollars, accounting for 5.9% of Vietnamese total import value. It is estimated that the EVFTA will bring annual rise of 2.18% to 3.25% of the Vietnamese GDP by 2023, and sharply increasing both EU and Vietnam's export. The reduction of tariffs on Vietnamese goods exported to EU will create a great competitive advantage compared to other countries and also ASEAN countries. It is estimated that the Vietnam's export to EU will increase by 42.7% in 2025 and 44.37% in 2030. Vietnam total export to the world will increase by 5% to 8% in the first 5 years of EVFTA implementation from 2021 to 2025. 11% to 15% in the following period of 5 years, 2025 to 2030, and 18% to 22% in 2030 to 2035. So as you may know that, anyway, there is no exact estimate on FTA from EU after the investment protection agreement of EVFTA becomes effective. However, with Vietnam's strong commitment to institutional reform and improvements in the investment environment, Vietnam is becoming more attractive to EU investors. And Vietnam is committed to opening its service sector, especially in environment, postal, banking, insurance, maritime, transportation, and so on and so forth. It hopes that the FDI from EU increase in the near future. So I think that European businesses, you can happy with that, with the progress of the FTA. So second question, talking about which sectors in Vietnam will make the most use of this. So according to us, you know, the agriculture and fishery sector is the sectors which make the most use of this. EVFTA will bring great market potential for agricultural and fishery exports from Vietnam, including rice increased by 65% in 2025, sugar 80%, pork 4%, forestry products 3%, cattle and poultry meat 4%, beverage and tobacco 5%, and seafood 2% is the period from 2020 to 2030. And second sector is maybe the textiles industry. According to the forecast, textiles and apparels export turnover to EU market will rapidly increase by about 67% by 2025, compared to the scenario without the agreement. So in terms of production, EVFTA generally has a positive impact on the input, with the growth rate of 6% for the textiles and 14% for garment industry by 2030. And the third sector is the leather and footwear industry. The growth rate of exports to EU is forecasted to double by 2025. Indeed, the total export of leather shoes will also increase by about 34%, and the industry's output will increase by 31.8%. The commitment in the EVFTA will also create more competitive pressure on us in some industries, such as pharmaceutical, dairy, livestock, financial services, banking, insurance, and logistics. Specifically, about half of EU pharmaceutical export will be immediately tax-free, and also, as a reminder, will also immune from taxation after 7 years. So reducing import duties on pharmaceutical from the EU will increase competitive pressure on the domestic pharmaceutical manufacturer. So we expect much pressure from the pharmaceutical business coming from EU in the future. And also frozen pork and processed food will be exempt from tax after 7 years. Daily products after 5 years, and tax-free for chicken will be reduced to 0 in 10 years. Currently, EU livestock products exported to Vietnam are subjected to tax rate of 10 to 40%. The reduction of import tax on livestock products from EU will promote the penetration of this product into Vietnam and increase the competitive pressure on domestic livestock products. Besides, some European countries are famous with dairy products. Reducing import duties on dairy products imported from EU will also increase competitive pressure on domestic milk producers. However, EVFTA opens up more opportunities for Vietnamese dairy companies to have easier access to European milk production technology and materials which are highly appreciated for food quality and safety, thereby contributing to improved quality of domestic dairy products. So in that sense, I think that the consumer in Vietnam will enjoy the better quality of the products in time to come. So also in the financial sectors, the EVFTA agreement provides the opportunity for promoting the liberalization of Vietnamese financial, banking, and insurance services. By opening services in this sector, it would have positive impact on the demand side of the markets and create opportunities for the Vietnamese businesses to cooperate with businesses from EU. By 2025, Vietnam's export of financial and insurance services will increase by about 21%, and imports will increase by 9.65%. However, competition pressure is very huge, and macroeconomic stabilization pressure is also greater because of opening of these services markets here, makes Vietnam more susceptible to external shocks. As for logistics, EVFTA can affect the prospect of logistic development into aspects. Firstly, Vietnam and EU commitment to opening markets in the field of transport and transportation services. Secondly, commitment affect logistic service market capacity in terms of scale, service, quality, demand for capacity expansion, and service performance. So last but not least, the question talking about how our Vietnamese businesses prepare for this, and how we as BCCI and other promotion organization like BCCI, we can help them. So as you may know that in April 2016, Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in short, BCCI, conducted a national survey among 250 companies in the key industries such as textile, footwear, electronics, wood, plastic, coffee, rubber, and aquaculture. The objective of the survey was to measure the likely impacts of EVFTA and how prepared these businesses for the implementation of the agreement. Most Vietnamese businesses have a positive outlook of the EVFTA. So as you can see that, most of our businesses in Vietnam, we have very good positive attitude about the EVFTA. So 88% of the survey's company plan to improve their production capacity in the following 3 years. So they are very optimistic about the EVFTA. And they are especially in the following areas. The first one is that, they try to improve the management skills. So of course, compete with European companies. Of course, we have better or higher management skills. And also worker skills, And access to the new market, we have to know how to access to the new market, because European market is open for us, for the business. And also we have to increase product quality, and also improve technology, and also we have to restructure production lines in order to increase productivity. So it's also challenges for our businesses. But anyway, we have no way to do other than that, you know, because we need to improve our competitiveness so that we can capitalize on the opportunities is coming to us after the FTA coming to the effect. However, the four largest obstacles for Vietnamese businesses to take advantage of FTA are: the first one, of course, we lack information on the commitment by the government and implementation of FTAs. But of course, information you can talk about, we have to raise the awareness of our businesses, especially small and medium-sized business, about the contents and also what kind of challenges, also opportunities they can have in the agreement. Also, other challenge is that, you know, there is a difficulty in the FTA implementation of government agencies. Of course, at the beginning, you can listen to the representatives of the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Vietnam, you know, talking about many things. But one of the challenges for our government agencies that, you know, how they can implement in the line of their mission, so that they can help businesses also implement the FTA. Also, limited capacity of Vietnamese business. Of course, you know, the limited capacity is very clear, and that we for our business. Also, difficulty in the following the rule of origin requirement. I think that the EU is the very strict. I think that one of the most district stick the kind of regarding the rule of origin requirement, so that, you know. So I think that in this regard, we look forward to the cooperation with Axelle, Belgium, Vietnam's alliance, so that we can raise the kind of things, so that we can overcome the challenge regarding the rule of origin, so that we can meet the requirements, so that we can facilitate our exporting to EU in the time to come. So in order to help Vietnamese businesses to better prepare for EVFTA implementation, we hope to have your collaboration in the following areas. So ladies and gentlemen, some areas we are looking for your cooperation, if possible. First one, of course, we have to promote stronger links between European-owned FDI and Vietnamese suppliers. And second is that we have to develop a wide and strong network of Vietnamese suppliers and European buyers and distributors for high-quality products. And we have to increase market research capacity among Vietnamese companies exporting to the EU. And also, if possible, we can cooperate in organizing training workshops for the Vietnamese companies to have better knowledge on rules of origin and capacity to comply with EU-Vietnam FTA. So in the context of COVID-19, also second task, besides we have to develop our economy, we have to fight the COVID-19. So I think that, you know, the ratification and implementation of the EVFTA becomes all the more important for the Vietnamese companies. It can play a critical role in Vietnamese recovery efforts in response to the COVID, and also to recover our economy in the future. And thank you very much for listening and looking towards for your comments and any cooperation if possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duong Cu Khong, from Vice Chairman from the VCCI, for your very interesting keynote speech. I'd like to go now to the next speaker from our panel, Mr. Nicolas Audier from Eurocham. Mr. Audier will tell us more about how Eurocham prepared the entry into force of the free trade agreement. What challenges do they face? Mr. Duong, can I ask you to unmute you once again? Thank you. So I give now the floor to Mr. Audier.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Andreas, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to see our colleague our friend from the EU delegation in Hanoi, from the Vietnamese Embassy in Belgium, and of course, Mr. Hendrik Teunisz. I know you are working with Mr. Bourgeois, who was the rapporteur of this FTA and the EVIPA. And also I see my colleague from the Belgian Wallon Economic Mission. So yes, of course, I mean, Eurocham has been backing this FTA a while ago. We started in 2012. As you know, we have been working, our 17th sector committee has been working very hard during the negotiation of this FTA and IPA actually. And we provided as much as we can, any insight, any information on the market, on all the industry and all the activities of our companies in Vietnam. So that goes from the wine and spirit sector committee to the automotive sector committee, which is a very sensitive sectors, up to the cosmetic, pharma industry. So all of the sectors, and we provided to the EU negotiator, I think, the best information from the ground, from our EU companies. We had, of course, we've done many polls, and one of them was interesting because 90% of our members have a very positive impact of the FTA and IPA. So, and we've been working around, or during the 14th round of negotiation, up to the ratification. Ratification has been a very complicated process, and I see Mr. Hendrik from the EU Parliament. We have to go, of course, to the EU Council, EU Commission, but the most critical aspect was the EU Parliament, where we had many meetings. We have something like 60 or 70 members of the Parliament, and you have issue on the green, issue on the environment. We have issue also on human rights. So we have many issues that we have to deal with each of the MEP and each of the political party of the EU Parliament. But that's good news. The EVFTA has been ratified by now the National Assembly of Vietnam, and we just wait something like 15 days where it will be now fully implemented in Vietnam. The EVIPA will be in force, implemented years from 2020, and we think about 2025, 2022, 2023, since it has to go to the 27 national parliament of the 27 EU country. And some country, including, I mean, Belgium, you had more than one parliament. So that's explain why it will be approved in ratified in 2022 or 23. So I think many of things has been said. The most visible aspect of this EVFTA will be visible in 15 days, which will be, as any of the previous speaker mentioned, the elimination of custom duty. I speak about custom duty and not tax, because we had some issue on SCT, special consumption tax. But as of August 1st, 65% of the product exported to Vietnam, from Europe to Vietnam, shall be with no custom duty, and 71% of Vietnamese product to Europe will be exported with no custom duty. One of our sector committee at Eurocham is the custom duty facilitation, and we understand that at the local level, at the port level or custom port level, we understand that now the custom duty officer, they have the new tariff schedule on the product, which will be free as of August 1st for the export and import. And I see one of the questions in the seminar you have. I will give you the website where you can have access to the new code, which will be applicable in a few weeks. Of course, every sector will be impacted, some quickly, some on the medium term, some on the long term. Madame Nicaise mentioned the auto industry, which will be for EU will be free with only within 10 years from the date of ratification. For the pharmacy, it will be after 7 years, whilst 50% of the product shall be already zero custom duty as of August 1st, but wine and spirit will be 7 years, and agro industry within 5 years. But that is the most visible part of the agreement. And again, we will see in 15 days if it is fully implemented on the ground. We had some discussion relating to the CPTPP, which give us a good a highlight, because we understand that it may happen that August 1st, the new tariff will not be implemented. But I understand on the CPTPP, they have exactly the same issue as we are going to have. The custom authorities has agreed to pay back, to reimburse the exporters of product to the Vietnam market in the event the tariff was not applicable. But again, that is the most feasible part of the FTA. I think Madame Nicaise mentioned many other issues, and this is why this agreement is very special. But this agreement is now, you can get a copy of this agreement on the website. It's a huge document, 1,500 pages. Now you can download. It's in 22 languages in Europe, so it's in French and German and English and all of that. Very complicated agreement, but that's concern all the segment of the law of Vietnam. So concern, I mentioned the custom duty, that concern also the non-tariff barrier, which will be eliminated, the SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary issue. Bear in mind that as of August 1st, Vietnam will consider Europe as a single entity, which was not the case before. So any import of agro-industry from each of the 27 countries have a different mechanics to be imported to Vietnam, because Vietnam was not considering the EU as a single entity. IPR, geographical indication, distribution. Within 5 years from now, when a company from Europe would like to establish in Vietnam a retail network, it will not be subject anymore to the economic need test, which will be fantastic opportunities for the EU exporters with access to the public market. Many issues on the sustainable development, social law. We mentioned about the ILO convention that has been now ratified, so we're just waiting how it will be implemented on the day-to-day. Green energy, we mentioned the Paris Agreement, and also one thing is important, the involvement of the civil society of Vietnam in this agreement. So it will not be only controlled, managed by EU and Vietnam government, but also you will have some input from civil society of Vietnam. You have also regulation on the state-owned enterprise. As you know, a big part of the GDP of Vietnam is coming from the SOEs, and this is why in this EVFTA you have mentioned about more balance between state-owned sectors and private sectors. So we anticipate a lot of delocalization of foreign direct investment from Vietnam, from abroad to Vietnam, thanks to this FTA, which we witnessed, but also it's also a consequence of the US-China war. But we see many FDI coming from China and relocalizing in Vietnam. Vietnam could be now the hub of any investment within the ASEAN. As you know, ASEAN established years ago the ASEAN EC, the ASEAN Economic Community, which means that any export from one of the ASEAN countries to the other will be a custom duty. So Vietnam now could become the hub of any FDI, EU FDI to ASEAN. And of course, we anticipate great reform on the administrative. So now the question is how to make sure this agreement will be fully implemented. We had a similar issue years ago with the WTO, where it took some time. It took it was complicated to get this WTO implemented on the ground, and we don't want to see that again for this FTA. And this is why, and I see my colleague from the VCCI, and this is one we're going to launch Eurocham VCCI Business Council, comprising 5 person from VCCI, 5 person from Eurocham, together with our 17th sector committee, and we are going to monitor the implementation of the FTA on the ground. We are going also to monitor the implementation of the roadmap. We've done a roadmap some years ago between the law of Vietnam and the law coming from the FTA. So we have already highlighted what needs to be amended in the law of Vietnam to ensure we will have the full benefit of this FTA. We'll continue to do many seminars in Vietnam and abroad, because we have, as you know, we have 64 provinces in Vietnam, and we shall try to go to as many provinces as we can, but we shall need to see as many local authorities and Department of Planning and Investment, Department of Trade, to ensure that the expert at the local level has a good understanding of the FTA. We are still a part of this ACAPR, which is actually a body under the control of the Office of the Government to eliminate in Vietnam any regulation which are redundant or not fully effective. And this is what we have done, by the way, 2 weeks ago in Hanoi, where we organize ACAPR seminars to review 17 industries in Vietnam where are the loophole. We are going to continue, of course, our white book, which is a book that we publish every year in Vietnam, which highlights to the government of Vietnam any issue that our companies are facing in Vietnam. But also, what is now important is to make sure the private sector in Vietnam, but also in Europe, will take the ownership of this FTA, because this FTA has been negotiated for 10 years, but we need to ensure that the private sectors in both, in both countries, EU, Europe and Vietnam, understand and take the ownership of this agreement. And we need to promote as much as we can this FTA in Europe, which we'll continue to do. Thank you, Andreas. I hope I was not so long.
No, that's no problem. Thank you, Nicolas Audi. Thank you very much for your keynote speech. I'd like to go now to Mr. Walter van Hees from FIT, Trade and Investment Counselor for the Embassy of Belgium, and with his keynote about what are the business opportunities for Belgian entrepreneurs in Vietnam. Walter, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Chairman, for giving me the floor. And also many thanks to BVA and Belgium, of course, for organizing this webinar. I think it's a very, very important topic for all European companies and, of course, also for all Belgian companies. As mentioned, I am a Trade and Investment Counselor for Flanders Investment and Trade. I'm based here at the Belgian Embassy in Hanoi. And I've actually been working here in Vietnam in that capacity for over 5 years already. And I think I can say I've been very fortunate in that. I'm also very fortunate to still be here today, looking at what's been happening globally these past few months. Without going into detail about it, because the next speaker will touch more upon the subject, but I think it's safe to say that Vietnam has been dealing exceptionally well with the whole COVID-19 crisis. Sticking to the economic side of things, Vietnam's economy is actually still poised to grow anywhere between roughly 2.7 and 5% this year, depending on the source you tap into, including the Vietnamese government, IMF, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank, for example. For next year, 2021, and also the years following that, GDP growth is expected to reach 7% again, as was the case in the previous years. But these numbers are nothing short of impressive, and I think quite unique even in the global context. So all in all, I think it's fair to say that the cocktail of the EVFTA entering into force on one hand and this positive economic outlook on the other hand opens up a realm of new business opportunities for Belgian entrepreneurs in Vietnam. But what are these opportunities and how can you actually tap into the huge economic potential that the country has to offer? Of course, giving an overview of all opportunities in all business sectors is virtually impossible given the time constraint. So I've decided to pick out just a few sectors to give you a brief idea. First one maybe is agriculture and food processing, which was already touched upon briefly by the previous speaker. Agriculture actually still forms a very strong backbone of the whole Vietnamese economy. Vietnam is one of the largest global growers, producers, and exporters of rice, pepper, coffee, cashew nuts, seafood, tropical fruit, for example. but the potential of this industry is still somewhat hampered by a few inefficiencies in production, low levels of local processing, a certain lack in marketing on the global level, and so on. And I think Belgian companies can certainly play a role in the development of this sector. And as a side note, it's also interesting to know that Belgium and Vietnam signed a strategic partnership on sustainable agriculture in 2018. A second sector, which I think is worth mentioning, is fast-moving consumer goods. The Vietnamese middle class constitutes of a growing part of the population, often dual-income households living in urban areas, such as Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, and having the financial resources, which they happily spend on luxury products, ranging from food and beverage, of course, but also fashion items, interior decoration, just to name a few. And I think there are also a lot of opportunities for Belgian suppliers of all kinds of products within these fields. Vietnam is looking more and more into the opportunities that renewable energy offers, ranging from floating to rooftop solar, over on and offshore wind energy, all the way to waste to energy. Vietnam is slowly but surely adapting its regulatory framework in the field of energy production and distribution to accommodate these types of renewable energy projects. The country is also systematically being ranked globally among the 5 countries which are affected most by climate change. Because a significant part of the population and economic activity is situated in low-lying coastal areas and deltas, climate change is leading to, for example, yearly floods and droughts with major consequences nationwide. A number of internal and also external factors are putting extra pressure on the Vietnamese environment. The rapid rate of industrialization, for example, and urbanization leads to issues concerning air quality, water quality, waste management, and so on. And I think many Belgian companies offer clean tech solutions, environmental technology solutions, which can help to mitigate these issues. It's also investing continuously in its infrastructure, such as ports and airports, roads, the rail and inland waterway network. And that last one, the inland waterway network, is a sector wherein the region of Flanders, for example, has been closely cooperating with the Vietnamese authorities for many years already. And also this offers a lot of opportunities for companies with specific know-how and expertise and technologies. One final rather broad field, which offers many opportunities, is digitalization and related smart technologies. The Vietnamese government is proactively pushing the country's transformation to a digital society. And it's doing that with a wide variety of stakeholders, ranging from manufacturing companies, agriculture sector again, but also the governmental authorities themselves, where several e-government projects are being initiated. One example is the just recently announced National E-commerce Development Plan, which aims this sector to grow by 25% each year. So it would reach $35 billion in sales within the next 5 years, with half of the country's population buying online by 2025, which is quite astonishing. All these and also many other sectors, of course, offer something for Belgian entrepreneurs on the condition that they approach Vietnam the right way. So what is the right way? Well, of course, I don't think there's one single one-track way of going about this. It all depends on your specific product or service and on the market segment that you're operating in. But in general, there are a few things to keep in mind when you approach a country like Vietnam. And these might seem obvious to a lot of you, but I think they're still important enough to briefly mention today. And the first, probably most important thing is don't try to tackle the Vietnamese market on your own. In virtually all cases, you will need a local partner. Vietnam, like many, if not all Asian markets, is very much relationship-based. And no matter what, you will need to establish a solid and a wide network here locally. Finding a reliable and experienced partner can help you to shortcut this issue. And the word partner in this sense is a very conscious choice of word, or word of choice. Your partner can be anything ranging from an importer or a distributor, over an agent, a representative, a local consultant. But whatever shape or form it takes, you will need to foster the relation in order to build up a real and a very solid partnership here locally. And of course, this will involve some investment of money and time and energy, but without that, it would be very, very difficult to get anywhere here in Vietnam. And the consequence is that you should view the Vietnamese market as a long-term objective. Countless times, I personally have received feedback from Belgian entrepreneurs and companies about how they're about to give up on the Vietnamese market altogether after not receiving any feedback to the one email they sent to a potential partner or customer here. But it simply doesn't work that way. The country really does demand more time and more effort. You will need to travel here regularly, which granted is impossible in the current circumstances. But at some point, things will go back to normal. So if you are very serious about the Vietnamese market, you should be prepared to jump in the deep end, albeit well prepared, of course. And I speak for the 3 regional export promotion agencies, Hub Brussels for the Brussels Capital Region, AWEX for Wallonia, and FIT for Flanders, saying that we are ready to support the companies located in our respective regions with a range of market information, contacts of potential partners, and so on. So please do use our service if you want to seriously develop your export market potential here in Vietnam. Another way of tackling the market is by establishing your own presence here. That is, on the one hand, of course, even more time and money and energy intensive. But on the other hand, it's a very efficient and effective way of building up your own local network and business intelligence. And while Hub Brussels, AWEX, and FIT can also support you to some extent if you want to look into such a local investment project, I would also like to mention that the 2 business chambers, the organizers of this webinar, namely BVA and Belgian, are also ready to support you there. Belgian, for example, is preparing a starter kit for Belgian companies that intend to set up a local presence here. And I'm sure they will be sharing the details of this kit once it's finalized. I'm going to wrap up here. But please, if you do have any specific questions afterwards, feel free to contact me and also my colleagues from AWEX and Hub Brussels anytime. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for your keynote. I go now to the last speaker, Mr. Eric Bretard, who will speak about, just take my right papers, yes, who is working at AWEX Trade and is sponsor for also the Embassy of Belgium. And his keynote is about update on the COVID-19 situation in Vietnam and overview of some relevant market opportunities in the healthcare sector. I will share now the PowerPoint. Wait a moment. Okay, so everyone can see it. You also, Mr. Bretard?
Okay. Good, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So I'm the representative for the Wallonia Export and Investment Agency in Vietnam. I'm based in Ho Chi Minh City. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the situation of Vietnam in terms of management of the pandemic, and also, more importantly, the business opportunities that this situation has created, more specifically in the health sector. Next slide, please. So far, as we all know, Vietnam has done a great job stemming the COVID-19 pandemic. The country, however, has been sealed from foreign visitors since the end of March, which can cause a problem in the short term, but hopefully the country will open again after the summer, I guess. Anyhow, there is still a lot of uncertainty about the timeline when the country will open, but that's the price of keeping the country safe so far. So we will not complain. To this day, Vietnam has reported only 370 cases of infection and no death, which is very important. Next slide, please. In order to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on the economy and support businesses, households and individuals, Vietnam has taken a number of fiscal, social, and generally speaking, pro-business measures. Next slide. For instance, the authorities have given the green light for the construction of new sections of the North-South Highway and the opening and the building of new holiday resorts. They have also designed specific measures to support the airlines which are in serious financial trouble, as many airlines around the world. This is really a Canadian approach, which I'm pretty sure will bear fruit very quickly. Next slide. So now I will focus a little bit on the healthcare in a broader perspective. For over 30 years, Vietnam has achieved substantial improvement in key public health metrics, such as average life expectancy. The Vietnamese have gained 10 years of life expectancy since 1980 in infant mortality, and nowadays 30 out of 1,000 fewer babies die at birth compared with the early 80s. In the 80s also, Vietnam adopted the World Health Organization expanded program on immunization, which has had a very serious effect on the health, positive effect on the health of people. And the most important factor probably is the fact that in 1992, Vietnam began its efforts to provide universal health coverage. And nowadays, 90% of Vietnamese citizens enjoy this coverage. However, until now, the total healthcare expenditure per capita, which is estimated at $149, is still very low compared with other ASEAN countries such as Malaysia, which is over 450, Thailand 270, or even Singapore, which is over $3,000. This means in practice that there is a lot of scope for more business in the health sector in the future in Vietnam. Also, the pharmaceutical sector, which has been mentioned several times, is a very important one. It is so far covered by imports at a rate of 50%, including 20% of innovative pharmaceutical. This sector has enjoyed a double-digit growth in the past few years. And more importantly, a sizable part of these drugs and vaccines are being imported from Belgium and Wallonia. Next slide, please. So on the backdrop of a difficult sanitary situation, a few Vietnamese sectors have managed to capitalize on a difficult business environment. First and foremost, the textile garment industry, which is also one of the main export sectors of Vietnam and accounts for 4 billion euros worth of export to the EU. At the beginning of the pandemic, this industry was hit very severely on two fronts. On the supply side, import of raw material from China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan was seriously hampered. On the export side, the demand from the EU and the US collapsed overnight and many orders were canceled. However, Vietnamese industrialists are very reactive and resilient, and many garments factories very rapidly started manufacturing fabric masks, which have been supplied all over the world, including to the US and Belgium. On the other hand, it didn't take Vietnam much time to develop its own quick testing kits, which have been used widely in the country and even exported in the region. Actually, even before the pandemic, Vietnam had the ambition to expand its drug and vaccine production capacity. The Ministry of Health has quickly taken the challenge at hand. And as of today, a Vietnamese COVID vaccine is already under preclinical studies. Now, the connection with Belgium. The fact is that in addition of being a major manufacturer of drugs, Belgium has numerous producers of technologies for the development and manufacture of drugs, including hardware, software, quality control system, and Industry 4.0 solutions applied to drug development and manufacturing. I have also to point out that Belgium is the second largest provider of clinical trials in the world, second only to the US. So we conduct thousands of clinical studies every year in Belgium. So in order to achieve its ambition of becoming a recognized innovative drug developer and manufacturer, Vietnam will have to expand, organize, and certify its clinical trial capacity. And Belgium is home to quite a few companies with all the necessary experience, tools, and competencies to assist Vietnam on this path. Next slide. As already mentioned, since the 80s, the life expectancy in Vietnam has increased dramatically. This means that the population is aging and that a number of non-communicable diseases, cancer, diabetes, respiratory diseases, etc., have been growing in importance. In this case too, Belgium, and particularly Wallonia, has become a significant player on the world medical scene in the last, in at least 4 areas. First, biopharma, including cell and gene therapy and industrial production of biomedicines, digital health and e-medicine, nuclear medicine, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostics. Next slide. On the other hand, there is an increasing demand for expanding healthcare services with continuous quality improvement. There are more than 200 private clinics and hospitals in Vietnam, 550 central and provincial level hospitals across Vietnam, and they all need new technologies to address this increasingly demanding patient base. On top of that, until now, access to quality medical services can still be problematic in remote rural areas. Meanwhile, for the affluent part of the population, the pandemic suddenly laid bare the danger of relying on overseas medical services for treatment, while the local private solutions was put on hold during the lockdown. All private clinics had to close down for several weeks during March and April. So number of hospitals and points of care became virtually inaccessible, also due to the fear of catching the infection while visiting the hospital for whatever reason. Also in early April, Hanoi's Bac Mai Hospital became the main hotspot of the pandemic in Vietnam. All these seemingly negative factors actually have given a very strong boost to e-medicine. Next slide, please. So while the distribution and qualification of medical doctors still leaves space for improvement, smart health services, including remote patient examination, artificial intelligence applied to diagnostic and medical data analysis, can adequately fill the gaps in the health competence pool. Once again, in this case, several Belgian companies have affordable and tested solutions to offer. The high density and quality of the internet coverage in Vietnam will allow the deployment of all these technologies, web-based solutions, very rapidly. So a few local players have already been active in these areas for a few years, but their solutions are still in infancy. And what I heard reportedly, there are a lot of bugs. So in summary, I see several reinforced, next slide please. I see several reinforced export opportunities in the health sector, medical equipment and services for the medical providers, including for nascent family practice and home care, technologies, consulting services for the emerging pharmaceutical industry, advanced and innovative drugs and nutraceuticals as well for non-infectious diseases. Next slide. Okay, unfortunately, I have no time to elaborate, but Wouter already gave other examples of growing potential for export. My short list is technology, services, and products for the tourism industry, which remains a very strong economic sector in Vietnam, and it will probably grow in the next few years. E-everything, digital banks on digitalization across the board, e-commerce, e-logistics, collaborative economy and whatnot. So very strong potential there. Infrastructure and smart transport technologies, clean and smart energy, production, transmission, distribution, all of it, and agro and food technologies for the local market as well as for export and to benefit from the advantages of the EVFTA. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blitar, for your keynote and your presentation. So now we have our time, about 20 minutes for some questions, and also regarding to the questions which are mentioned in our Q&A box. So I have a total of 4 questions, which I like to share with the members of the panel. The first question is about the EPA, because we didn't talk about the EPA as an EPA, but as you know, everyone, is that the FTA, so the free trade agreement, when you talk about taxes, etc., this is a competence for the European level. When you talk about the EPA, so this is about investment and protection, this is also decided on European level, but it has to be ratified by all the member states. So modeled on the European Union Singapore Investment Protection Agreement, the Investment Protection Agreement will replace here the 20 existing bilateral investment agreements between Vietnam and the 21 EU member states. It has, like I said, been approved by the European Parliament, but it still has to be ratified by the member states before it can come into force. So my first question here to Hendrik Teunissen is, what do you expect if there will be problems or not in the future about this IPA, if you're talking about ratification by the member states? And for Nicolas Audier, I'd like to know from him, how important is then the IPA for Vietnam and the European Union? But I give first the floor to Hendrik Teunissen.
Thank you, Chair. As you rightfully pointed out, contrary to the FTA, investment agreement needs to be ratified by all member states. And as Monsieur Adier has pointed out, this means also in Belgium by all regional parliament. And as the CETA experience showed us, there was some difficulties in some regional parliaments. But we believe Mr. Bourgeois is convinced that this ICS proposal we have now, not only in CETA, but also in EU Vietnam.
I think there's a small problem with Hendrik Teunissen, but maybe I first go to Nicolas Audier. How important is the IPA for Vietnam and European Union? Because they're always talking about the FTA, but you have also the part of the IPA.
Yeah.
Nicolas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, everyone mentioned the FTA. By the way, in the FTA, we have also a mechanism to settle any issue coming from the FTA. So any issue coming from the trade agreement. Now we speak about the IPA, which is the investment agreement. So it means that you are investing in Vietnam and you are looking for, or a Vietnamese company investing in Europe, and you have some issue related to the IPA. So far, as you mentioned, you mentioned 20 EU countries. Most of the EU member states has what we call as a bilateral investment treaty. So it means that today, until the ratification of the EVIPA, the 20 existing BIT will be still in force in Vietnam. So it means that if I think Belgium has a BIT with Vietnam, bilateral investment treaty. So it means that when a Belgian companies invest in Vietnam, they will be under the umbrella of the Belgium-Vietnam bilateral investment treaty. But of course, that's cover only 20 countries, but we have 27 countries in Europe. So mainly Eastern European country doesn't have any mechanics to protect their investment in Vietnam. So it's of course, it's a very, I mean, we are all pushing for this IPA. I don't, Mr. Speedy, that we couldn't discuss with Mr. Hendrik, but the IPA, of course, will be a good sign for any major investment from Europe to Vietnam. I just would like to mention something about the court system in Vietnam, because I've been working and living in Vietnam for many years, and I'm a lawyer. My job is a lawyer. I'm not the chairman of Eurocham. This is not my job. My job is a lawyer in Vietnam, and we can applaud all the change that Vietnam has done over the last, I mean, since the launching of the Doi Moi, since 1987. We have fantastic investment code, we have fantastic labor code, we have fantastic regulation in Vietnam. But the court system in Vietnam, I say that every year, even when we publish the white book for 2020, so every single year we mentioned that we need to improve the court system in Vietnam, because if you need to have a lot of investment from Europe, we need to have a transparent, predictable court system in Vietnam with a rule of law, with a precedent. We need this kind of basic things to have when everyone is investing in Vietnam. And by the way, when I see a company from Europe investing in Vietnam, all the time they ask me, what about if we have an issue in Vietnam, what do we do? Do we go to the court system in Vietnam, or do we go to an offshore system? As you know, Vietnam is part of the 1958 New York Convention, meaning that any offshore arbitration court decision should be enforced in Vietnam, but as a matter of practice, it's very difficult to enforce a foreign decision in Vietnam. So, of course, we all applaud on this IPA, and we're all expecting a swift ratification by the 27 member states. But again, the issue will be its full implementation in Vietnam, because it's difficult in Vietnam to litigate, especially when you are litigating against a state-owned enterprise in Vietnam. But when you are also litigating against private companies in Vietnam, it's very difficult to enforce the decision. So this is the statement that we have from many of our members at EuroCham. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Nicholas, for this clear answer. Just to give the message to all the attendees, because there are two questions about the NACE codes. That's where we can find that back and this time schedule, etc., etc. So we will send to the website where you can find everything, because it can be found on the website of Eurostat, so-called European Industrial Activity Classification, NACE Codes Revision 2, and also the list of tariffs are to be found in the annexes of the EVFTA. But we will send the links to all the attendees, so this question is then solved for two of the attendees. I go to another question now from Diane for Walter van Hees. What about services such as training for business top-level manager in terms of protocol and cultural diplomacy? Is there a business for them?
I think there is. As I mentioned, the importance is certainly there for to have a local partner here, and it's not only about the local network or the being able to tap into a local network. It also has to do with a different style of communication, even language. I think here in Vietnam, there is still a way to go, if I may call it that, in terms of international entrepreneurship and the training that gets involved with that, or that is involved with that. So I'm sure that there are some opportunities for that specific. Well, it's a niche sector, of course, but I'm sure there are some opportunities for that as well. Yes, and for training in general, actually. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Mr. Ambassador and also for Mr. Bretard. It's about that they say, okay, we have the COVID-19, and because of the COVID-19, entering now Vietnam is quite impossible. You have to go in quarantine also. So the question is, if you have already an idea when the commercial flights between the European Union and Vietnam will be authorized again. I give first the floor to the ambassador, and then afterwards I give the floor to Mr. Bretard.
So for this question, it's not easy up to now. Up to now, it's not easy to have an exact answer. You know, we are still in the period of COVID-19 crisis. For Vietnam, we have to prevent the second wave of this disease, and it's the highest priority for Vietnam up to now. Even the cost is too high. but Vietnamese people is ready to accept this price. And up to now, according to the latest information I received from the capital, Vietnam has considered to reopen commercial flights from and to Guangzhou, China, Taiwan, Seoul, Tokyo, these places that have performed well control of COVID-19. And we hope, up to now, I hope, after the entry into force of the free trade agreement between EU and Vietnam, we hope that the government will consider to reopen commercial flights between Vietnam and Europe. But up to now, I'm not sure, because the highest priority continue to be to prevent the second wave of the pandemic. So we up to now it depends on the evolution of the pandemic in Europe and also around the country around Vietnam. I'm sorry, I cannot provide you the exact answer for this very sensitive and difficult question.
Okay, no problem, no problem. I give the floor to Mr. Blitar.
Yes. Vietnam seems to apply a very simple and strict principle. When you don't have any new COVID infection in your country for at least 30 days, you are on the green list. I mean, then there is a chance for you to travel to Vietnam. That's as simple as that. That's, frankly speaking, common sense. And living here, I say, wait, that's a good decision. I mean, Vietnam is taking a toll. I mean, tourism is in disarray. It's very difficult for Vietnam. But the long-term positive aspects of keeping Vietnam, how shall I say, clean or as one of the best countries in terms of safety are huge. So Vietnam will not, I would say, will keep the situation as it is. And second point, it will reopen not only to the countries that have less or no more COVID infections, but also to the main investors in the country. Korea, Japan, China, Singapore, Taiwan are the main investors. So they have a lot of plans, infrastructure projects in the country. So Vietnam needs them in priority. Europe is relatively a smaller investor. So it's less of a priority for Vietnam. So these two factors for me will determine when we'll be able to fly to Vietnam again when we want. It's common sense.
Okay, well, that's a clear message. I think people like more that a clear message, even if it's not that good news, but clear is clear, and so then people are not frustrating because they don't know what are the rules. And I think that's a clear rule. If a country has not be free for 13 days, then okay, there's no green light. I think that's a clear message. The next question, I think it's already said by everyone a little bit in all the different presentations, but still there was one question was like, although now at the moment, on the short term, the most interesting sectors or products for the Vietnamese market, public or private, to acquire from the European markets. And I was hoping that I can also give the floor to VCCI, but they are away already, but maybe that Mrs. Nicaise can answer on this question. So just on the short term, which are the most interesting sectors and products at the moment for Vietnam from the European market? Mrs. Nicaise, you have the floor.
So who is answering? Huh?
She's not normally Mrs. Nicaise, but I don't know if she is listening to Mrs. Nicaise.
Yes, hello,
Yes.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will leave the floor to the Deputy Head of Section for Trade Matters because this is a very concrete.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Bartosz Cieleszyński. Well, just very short. I mean, this answer was already provided, I think, as you mentioned, by a number of speakers. I think from the EU side, for us, what is very attractive in Vietnam is, of course, the sector of pharmaceuticals. This is also for the Belgian investors. This is one of the most important sectors, but also other sectors, textiles, cars, generally medical devices as well. So I think generally Vietnam offers a lot of opportunities for the European business players, and we are looking towards maximizing these business opportunities in the years to come. That's a very short answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I've seen that Mr. Tunis is back in town, I believe, because he sent me a WhatsApp. So if you can go back to him because of the first question concerning this IPA. Mr. Tunis, can I give you the floor? No, it's not in. Just try to. Maybe to just checking that he's not in the attendees, but he's.
I'm listening to you.
Yes, but is he back in town?
Mr. Hendricks, right?
Yes.
Okay, just let me check. Yes, he's now here. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you bring him to the panelists because he's now an attendee?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. Hendrik, now you can speak.
Okay, so sorry, I had a connection problem, but thank you so much for giving me the possibility to reply to your first question, because it's indeed important. The job is not done yet. The ICS proposal is actually a very good one, and I just would like to point out 4 key features of this new ICS: independent judges, a code of conduct, protection of the right to regulate, and especially a facilitated access to this investment court for SMEs. So, Chairman, to conclude, this investment agreement is also a crucial part of the total package, and it will present huge opportunities for companies, both for big opportunities and especially for SMEs. And that's the message I would like to convey on behalf of Mr. Bourgeois. So hopefully we can ratify also this ICS in all national parliaments, including the regional parliaments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hendrik, and give the best regards to Heer Bourgeois, because he was still the rapporteur for this very important FTA in the European Parliament. So he has a very important role here in the whole issue, but also the ambassador, who has done a lot of things for ratifying the whole free trade agreement and the IPA. And I think also a lot of people between these panelists have all their small or bigger or very big role in the whole process. A webinar is not the same as a real networking where you can meet each other physically, where you can drink a glass afterwards, but we found it very important to do it on this way, because normally it was provided to do it somewhere of March, I think, but then of course of COVID, it was not impossible. We have to cancel the whole organization. So we found it very important, certainly because the Vietnamese government is now has also ratified them in their parliament to do it on this way. It is a little bit strange. The advantage is that you have no connection also with the Vietnamese people staying now and at the same moment in Vietnam, so that you have a connection between Vietnam and let's say Europe. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is I like to have my glass of wine or my beer after that you can talk and you can network, etc. I think that this meeting, this webinar was, of course, more like a helicopter view on this very broad subject. And maybe we come back in September, October, or live, or with a webinar with more specific themes. concerning the whole FTA and the IPA. So I'd like to thank also, of course, all the people of Belgium and the BVA. I'd like to thank all the attendees. I'd like to thank all the members of the panel. Thank you very much. And we can close now the webinar. So we are very nice in time because after 6 minutes, we are getting out of the webinar. Thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you.